Guys, I'll be on Jackman Radio right after this one finishes. We'll have another one, and I'll make sure that link is in the chat. Here you go with Kevin Barrett.
Of Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett, doing underground radio for the internet age since 2006, although at that point there was probably as much going on the airwave, the actual airwaves and the satellites as there was on the internet. And now here we are. It's been well over a couple of decades since 9/11, and that problem hasn't been solved. But some people think that Donald Trump is going to solve all our problems. He's going to reveal the UFOs. He's going to reveal the Kennedy assassins. He's going to make peace with Russia, and he somehow got a ceasefire that's barely still holding in Gaza. So according to one view, Trump is the Messiah. On the other view, maybe he's the Antichrist or worse, because it's all going to go to hell in a handbasket when war breaks out with Iran. Then of course his guys are targeting China and so on and so forth. So who we're going to talk to try to figure all this stuff out now when it's not that clear yet precisely where it's all going? How about Ryan Dawson of the Anti-Neocon Report? First time on my show. He's been following the same paths as me for many, many years, so it's finally good to connect. Hey, welcome, Ryan. How's it going?
Yeah, our paths have crossed a few times. I think not too long ago, we were both on the same Press TV interview, and I said, Kevin Barrett, I wish we could do a show. Because I've seen your work before, and it's very similar to mine, very similar to my conclusions, and it's surprising it's taken this long for us to finally do a show.
That's true, yeah. Part of the reason probably is that I don't spend too much time with anybody else's audio visual. Partly it's a matter of time. It's partly my brain works better scanning text. My brain waves were warped when I was a little kid, and I learned to read kind of too early in life, and so I've got this massive left brain dominance thing going where send me text, it works, and
I also grew up in the paper age. I still notebook everything down.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, we're both relics of another time, and you're kind of the king of anti-neocon 9/11 truth broadcasting, but you don't write that much. So that's part of the reason.
I did, but it's just easier to plagiarize when you write stuff. But I don't like the word or the term 9/11 truth because I disagree with 99% of people who use that label. And you know how bad that's gotten with the airplane deniers and all that stuff. I don't like it. But yeah, I'm probably the most reasonable heterodox take on September 11th for sure.
Yeah, actually, let's get your take on that. So we both agree that the no planes hypothesis about New York is very, very, very likely wrong.
About all of it. There were definitely airplanes.
Okay.
I mean, the Pentagon is just as stupid because you've got a big airplane size hole with airplane parts in it with DNA from all the passengers who were on that plane hitting the building. And they're like, I didn't see it on film, so it didn't exist.
Okay, that's going to piss off some of my audience, but
too bad.
Yeah. For a while,
it's very important to admit there's an airplane, because if you don't have the plane, you don't have the hijackers. In particular, Nawif al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midhar. And if you don't have that, then you don't have a path back to state sponsorship of September 11th from Saudi Arabia. All that disappears when you deny an airplane.
Okay, well, so do you think you don't believe that there were actually human hijackers responsible, do you?
I do.
Really? Okay. Well, there you've gone a bridge too far for me. And here's my reasoning, and you can explain to me why this is wrong. Since the biggest, the most difficult demolitions in the whole history of the demolition industry were set up and would have taken quite some time and an immense amount of money, expertise, and so on, as well as all the expertise required to make it secret, right? So this was an amazing engineering project, those demolitions that they did to the whole World Trade Center, not just the three famous buildings, towers and Building 7. So you've invested in a tremendous amount of effort to prepare for these spectacular demolitions that are going to be the key part of the 9/11 psyop. And given that, you have to be 100% sure that planes are going to hit those buildings, or at least you can convince everybody that planes have hit the buildings. That's your excuse for what happened to those buildings. If the planes miss, or there are no plane strikes, you're stuck holding the bag. and you got a really major problem on your hands. Therefore, since you have to be 100%, well, maybe 99.99 would do, sure, that you have actual plane strikes on those buildings, you're going to have to find a better way to do that than to find human pilots and hijackers who are going to be capable of taking control of a plane and slamming it into those buildings in such a way that there's a big enough apparent, fireball, et cetera, that you can somehow hypnotize everybody into believing that that would have something to do with your demolitions. So given that, I could say, with 100% certainty, they had to have used autopilot to get those planes in those buildings, because there's no way you could ever have the required degree of confidence in any human pilots that they could do that. And then once we look at the details, the speeds and the trajectories and so on, it becomes even more clear that not even the world's best pilots could probably do that more than 50% of the time, even if they wanted to. And if you're arranging this event, you could never be sure that they would decide that they wanted to at the last minute, could you? So therefore, we know 100% sure those planes were not flown by humans. And if they weren't, what makes us think the other ones were?
That's putting the cart before the horse, assuming there's all this demolition and all this other jazz, and who you mean by they. You can have hijackers and have it assisted by some sort of automation, assisting them, but you have to have hijackers on the planes. Because if you don't have a person there, at least as a pretext, so you can say, hey, they did it all by themselves, the passengers on the plane, they go, why is the plane just turning around midair, like flying by itself? They could get on the airphones and say, hey, the plane is out of control or something. That's not what happened. There were hijackers there. We have long records of them going to flight schools. This is stuff they had to bury and redact from their own FBI reports to hide state collusion with September 11th terrorists.
Okay, so you're suggesting that let's see, the pilot who supposedly
it's not that hard to hit a building with a plane, and it's not that hard to hit the first floor of a building with a plane. With the Pentagon, it's just like landing a plane on the runway, except you don't put the landing gear down and you don't decelerate.
Wait,
people saying it had to smash through 6 walls. You have architects and engineers that don't even know what the architecture of the building even was. There were no rings on the bottom floor. Those only exist on the upper floors. We only went through 2 walls.
Okay, well, aside from the architectural debate or the engineering debate, which
that doesn't bother you that you have a team of people that have been saying that for like 20 years and they don't even fucking know that there's only 2 walls.
Actually, I don't remember anybody telling me the contrary over 20 years. I honestly don't.
Griffin and Gage and all them, they went on National Geographic and did a test about how many walls a plane could smash through. They had this thing, it's like a meme for 9/11 truthers. The soft nose cone of a Boeing 757 could smash through reinforced steel, concrete, blah, 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 blah. The building is shaped like a crown. The walls are on the top. The bottom floors in the basements don't have that. It just there's a 90-foot hole in the bottom floor of a plane. The black box from the plane was still there. Pieces of the plane were recovered, as did the DNA, which is at Walter Reed, of every passenger on that plane except for the baby.
And no alleged hijackers, as I recall.
They got all the hijackers.
Well, that's not what I understand. I remember that. Well, this has been 20 years since
there was confusion between 2 of them who were cousins as to which was what, that they had them both.
Yeah, the last I heard this was many years after it happened, at which point the relatives of some of the people who were blamed as supposed hijackers had been demanding the DNA evidence and not getting it. But putting that aside, the real problem with this theory is that Hani Hanjour, the pilot who the 9/11 Commission said was the best pilot of any of the hijacker pilots, was incapable of soloing in a Cessna training aircraft.
Why? Because the guys at the Iran-Contra flight school said he couldn't fly.
No, it was actually the Israeli who said, well, maybe he could fly, and the others all who said he couldn't.
Yeah, he could fly. He had a commercial pilot's license from Saudi Arabia before he even came to the U.S.
Hani Hanjour?
Yes, Hani Hanjour.
I highly, highly doubt that. Now, Mohammed Atta did. Mohammed Atta was a real pilot, which raises the question of why was Mohammed Atta hanging around the CIA's biggest drug import airstrip run by these magic Dutch boy gangsters, organized crime affiliated people. And Atta was pretending to learn to fly when he didn't need to learn to fly. And what he was really doing was accepting wads of cash and cocaine from the guys who ran that fake flight school, which actually didn't train anybody to fly. It was actually the biggest CIA drug import airstrip in Florida. And that whole story, of course, is told in Daniel Hopsicker's book. Excuse me? Yeah. So right. Additionally, I'm sure you're familiar. Are you familiar with
Saeed Al-Jarrah was
Daniel Hopsicker is an absolute fucking kook, and he also denies an airplane at the Pentagon.
He's not a pilot, and they said he was at Flight 93. Saeed Al-Jarrah had two first cousins popped in Lebanon as spies for Israeli intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are the odds of a 9/11 Al-Qaeda hijacker just happens to have family that not only works for the Israelis but work for Israeli intelligence?
Right, and he, like all of the other, he like virtually all of the others, or all of the other 19 guys that got blamed, he or the doubles, because in many cases, Ziad Jarrah, as I'm sure you know, the official ID pictures of Ziad Jarrah show three obviously massively different people. Okay, so there were at least two impersonators of Ziad Jarrah. As for Muhammad Atta, we know that the one in Florida that dated this pink-haired stripper Amanda Keller and ran around living up a party, high life kind of party lifestyle. It was a psychopath who disemboweled her kitten, et cetera, et cetera. That guy was fluent in Hebrew. The original Muhammad Atta was a very soft-spoken, shy, tender-hearted Egyptian who did get interested in sort of, Islamic critiques of Western civilization while he was studying in Germany, but he didn't speak a word of Hebrew. So we had at least two Muhammad Attas. We know that part. And
you have one Muhammad Atta and you have a lying stripper.
Excuse me?
You have a lying pink-haired stripper and one Muhammad Atta.
Okay,
the one
so
from Germany that got money from Mohammed Zammar, who was recaptured in Syria. That's the actual Muhammad Atta. I don't know, whatever the story is about killing kittens, that's just some loony woman in Florida.
Right, but her story to Hopsicker, it was basically backed up by dozens of people. Everybody Hopsicker talked to knew that this Atta guy who was fluent in Hebrew, they didn't, she's the only one who said he was fluent in Hebrew, of course, but basically her description of that character, of Atta's character, matched reports from many, many other people who interacted with that person. It was clearly not the original Muhammad Atta.
Yeah, there's a lot of people named Muhammad.
Well, so you're basically dismissing Hopsicker's book.
I'm dismissing the pink-haired stripper's testimony, yes.
Mm-hmm. But not all of his work. In other words, his work, he interviewed dozens and dozens of people. So you're saying that all these dozens of people he interviewed and his journalistic credentials and so on should be thrown out the window.
Yep.
Okay. How about all of the other mainstream journalistic reports along?
It's not all these dozens of people. It's dismissing Daniel Hopsicker, who just said, "Oh, all these people told me this." He's a fucking liar. He's a grifter and a liar.
Along exactly the same lines, which appeared shortly after 9/11, in which we got repeated stories about.
The reason I'm miffed in this interview is he asked me to come on and talk about Trump and his executive orders and stuff. And as soon as I sit down and get in the chair, he just started spouting off about 9/11 and airplane denial. And that's why I just rolled my eyes. I'm like, okay, this is the shit I'm going to deal with again today.
The hijackers had left alcohol-soaked Korans on the bar on the night of September 10th. They stayed up until bar time, 2 a.m. the night before they supposedly
brought a Koran to the bar and dipped it in alcohol. It sounds like 40-minute babies.
Yeah. So you're saying that somebody, a propagandist, wanted to create the impression.
This is to desecrate their Islamic belief and separate them from actual pious people who might see their side and see their grievances.
But wait, I mean, the whole official story was that these were radical Muslims, and that's obviously what the whole establishment, obviously the Zionists who did it.
The official story is they hate us for our freedoms, and it wasn't about any kind of political reason at all. They had their own will and testament all list political reasons for why they did it. Bombings in Beirut and slaughtering children in Iraq, they had legitimate reasons to hate the United States. And had really nothing to do with whether they were Muslim or not, other than it's a lot of Muslim kindred that are getting slaughtered. Now, for bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and some of these Zarqawi and these guys, they're definitely motivated by religion. But Muhammad Atta in particular, was an engineer that studied in Hamburg, and he only listed political reasons for his motivations. They did distance from each other.
So
it makes sense to go to strip clubs and things. Like at a certain point in Hamburg, when they returned, none of them met with each other again until they reconvened in the US, and they didn't go to mosque, and they stopped doing anything Islamic because they're trying to get visas and they're trying to stay off the radar. And going to a bar and having a drink of alcohol or something is a great way of being like, well, I'm not a radical Muslim, obviously, I'm having a beer.
Now, do you ever think that some of the information that you're relying on for these reports was fabricated, given, for instance, that we know that the evidence linking Muhammad Atta to 9/11, the two biggest troves of evidence were two magic suitcases. The first magic suitcase, I'm sure you're aware, was discovered in the airport in Boston, in Logan Airport, when Atta had flown.
Yeah, with all the plans in it.
So the night before this supposed attack, which you seem to believe this story, Atta and these hijackers had supposedly, rather than just getting on the flight in Boston, Flight 11, and flying it into the towers, instead, they drove all the way up to Maine so that they would then have to take a commuter flight with a tight connection that would fly them from Maine to Boston's Logan Airport, where they would transfer onto Flight 11 and then fly it into the towers. So that's the official story, that's supposedly what they did. And Atta checked this suitcase, which included his supposed last will and testament, which everybody knows is a complete joke, of course, an obviously false document. Anyway, he checked that suitcase onto the commuter flight in Maine, and he had like a 45-minute tight connection at Logan Airport. He made it on to Flight 11. I mean, he's planning the crime of the century, and he's going to take a 45-minute connection that he never had to take. He just should have stayed in Boston. Whatever. But, if you believe this, you're out of your mind. Anyway, so he then supposedly the suitcase doesn't make the transfer, but he does, and that's why we discovered the evidence that Atta did this. His last will and testament, which begins rather than Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful, compassionate, which is how you begin things if you're Muslim. It begins in the name of God, myself, and my family, and it goes on and gets worse from there. Most incompetently written, frame up document ever produced by an intelligence agency in all of history. But it was miraculously discovered. That's magic suitcase number one. And then magic suitcase number two is discussed in the Der Spiegel book on 9/11, which was discovered by a Good Samaritan burglar. That is, Atta's apartment was burglarized, and the burglar discovered documents that in a suitcase that looked like terrorist documents. So they went and delivered this, being Good Samaritan burglars, to their local police. Now, the police, according to Der Spiegel, said that the burglar was obviously working for an intelligence agency, and they speculated, but Der Spiegel wouldn't report about which intelligence agency that was. So these are the two magic suitcases that provide.
This is all shit, because it's like, well, only evidence we have are these magic suitcases. Wrong. They've been following Atta since he was in Germany. The CIA had tapped his phone, so the Israelis. And what you're doing is you're exonerating CIA foreknowledge and not acting on the information they had by pretending like no one had any information until after September 11th and they found his check bag in Maine.
With most of our official story about Muhammad Atta linking him to 9/11. And
there's more stupid than that, because you also have the Atta went to Prague lie, which he did not do.
Yep, absolutely.
Where supposedly he got anthrax from senior Iraqi intelligence officials. And the source of that is James Woolsey, the DCI for Clinton, blackmailed from Epstein. And his source was the Israeli security forces. So, of course, Israel's going to lie about Iraq and attach it to September 11th. And then you get the notes that say death to America, death to Israel. The paper trail of these people, they're patsies in a way. Useful idiots is a better brand. Al-Qaeda is not now.
Wait. If they're idiots, how can they pull it off? How could these
Because
guys
they're
pull it
being
off?
assisted by the US government, the Saudis, and the Israelis. They didn't do this by themselves.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So basically,
Their money is
yeah.
coming through BCCI's old outfits out of Riggs Bank.
Mhm.
But that you had Bandar Bush's support, you had you had the Faisals, you had Prince Turkey sending money to Dawid Al-Khet, Omar Bayoumi, and Osama Basnan. That they gave them logistical support. The Israelis gave them logistical support. The Miami field office contacted the Newark office about that, with Al-Omari being driven to New York from Florida by the Israelis, who were celebrating the attacks and had foreknowledge. Al-Qaeda is not an independent terrorist organization. They're cannon fodder like ISIS, sponsored by state powers. And those states are the Israelis, the Saudis, and the Americans. The
Yeah. Well,
CIA and
I would argue mainly the
FBI had
Israelis.
foreknowledge of all of these things
Mhm.
and didn't act on it.
Mhm. Now, have you considered the possibility that Laurent Guyonneau has raised about there being multiple, or at least two 9/11 plots? One of them, an American false flag designed to launch the war in Afghanistan, presumably, and that would have been much smaller and less murderous. And then the Israelis would have essentially hijacked that plot and built it up into something much bigger by essentially, by blowing up the World Trade Center. And that now the Israelis had the Americans, under a barrel or whatever. The Americans could not go after the people who blew up the World Trade Center because they were complicit in part of the plot. In any case, the point being that when you say the CIA knew everything, et cetera, I don't think it's that simple. I think that there are
The
different.
CIA is the counterintelligence office, and Tenet knew. Thomas Fields knew, Mike Figali knew, Richard Blee knew, Cofer Black knew. That was their plan. They ran the bin Laden unit, which didn't search for information on bin Laden. It was there as a dragnet to prevent that information from ever reaching the FBI. That's what they actually did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
Israelis already run the US. They don't need any
plausible.
extra giant event. I mean, the Israeli, look at Trump's cabinet right now. Every single one of them is a Zionist.
Right. But this is because they conditioned Americans to believe in this horrible Islamic terrorist threat that led Americans to jump into an $8 trillion series of wars in the region on behalf of the Israelis.
Well, as I know, you know, Al-Qaeda was created by the CIA and the Saudis to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. The money, all of the infrastructure that he used, communications, logistics, all that was started by spooks. George Bush's father worked with the Saudis after Watergate to move the CIA's funding overseas in a variety of different offshore charities and madrasas and things to hide it, because of Watergate and because of the domestic scrutiny they were facing. And so that's where they bore out these banks. And there's a big list of them. I've gone through it in films and stuff. That was the conduit in Afghanistan, and it never went away. I mean, BCCI got popped in 91, but all their little affiliate subsidiaries still existed. And they use the same network to finance HTS, or al-Sham, the Islamic state of Iraq and Syria. I don't like that name. It's not actually a state. It's not actually Islamic, but that's what it's called, and ISIS, and took over that state.
Mm-hmm.
Terrorists are now in charge of Syria, backed by the Turks and the Israelis.
Mm-hmm.
But the financial networks and some of the same people, it's exactly the same. Muhammad Atta's handler, Mohammed Zammar, was released in a prisoner swap in Syria. Fortunately, he got captured again in 2018 by Kurdish forces, so he's back in jail. But the American-backed terrorists were negotiating to get a 9/11 plotter out of jail, and they did it. It's unbelievable. And Omar Bayoumi didn't go to jail. Osama Basnan didn't go to jail. Anybody linked to the Saudi royals never went to Gitmo, never got in trouble. Their little underlings all went to Gitmo and got tortured. But the main brass, not only were they not touched, it took until 2015 to get the JS report, the Joint Inquiry Senate Investigation of September 11 terrorist attacks, and the Attorney General's report to finally even mention the names. I know you know about the 28 consecutive redacted pages. There was a lot more redacted than 28 pages. That was just 28 pages in a row. And that one all covered Saudi royal financing 9/11 hijackers.
Yes. I think that was a setup by the Israelis. Like, in other words, I think basically, okay, in August of 2001, the King of Saudi Arabia announced that the Saudis were no longer going to be part of the U.S. imperial orbit. He said it's time for a parting of the ways. And the reason for that is that the people of this region in general, and people in Arabia in particular, will not stand for the U.S. continuing to support the genocidal Zionists. So we are breaking away from the U.S. empire, and that parting of the ways speech made huge waves. Then
but
9/11 happened.
Bush is not the Saudis, it's he's a Bush, basically. That's why they call him that, and he's always worked with the Israelis.
Exactly. So there's a Saudi.
They don't need to create a brand new network when they can use a pre-existing one. That's why they use the Saudis.
Right. But see, there have always been patriots in places like Saudi Arabia who want to pursue Saudi interests, including the liberation of Palestine, which is an interest for all Muslims. And then there are traitors who work with the Americans who have superior money and technology and so on.
I think the Saudis are serious about liberating Palestine.
Some are and some aren't, but they killed a bunch of the ones who were
they could do that
after 9/11.
Cutting off oil to Israel.
After 9/11, they were able to they've killed Saudi leadership before. There's an ongoing war in this part of the world between the patriotic people who are trying to find some way to get out from under this genocidal Zionist bankster empire of Antichrist, and the agents of the Antichrist empire, basically.
I like that. Netanyahu is the Antichrist. The dude is straight up demonic. You can't do anything worse than what they're doing to those people. But I see the Saudi-Israeli alliance against Iran. Like, they really don't like Shia Muslims. They're fighting against Hezbollah. They fought against Assad. They fought against Yemen. Saudi Arabia and Yemen had a war for years. Saudi Arabia and Israel have been tied at the hip since 1976.
I don't think it's quite that simple. Like I said, there was the parting of the ways speech before 9/11. I think that the way that these Saudis were set up to be potentially blamable for 9/11.
I love this. Like, yeah, but forget all the actual actions they did. This guy made a speech. It's just Kevin can't accept it because it's like, well, yeah, but they're Muslim, so they, the Israelis made him do it. We're like, no, dude, Saudi Arabia sucks.
Thereby giving the empire immense leverage over the country, following which, of course, as you know, a number of high-level Saudis suffered mysterious deaths or blatant assassinations after 9/11. There was a purge, and I view that as a purge of the relatively patriotic Saudis on behalf of the empire, cementing its control over Saudi Arabia by pointing a gun at Riyadh's head, saying, "Okay, these 15 Saudi hijackers out of 19, we blame them. We blame Saudi Arabia. You're toast.
But we don't."
So that implicit threat to nuke Mecca.
Blame Saudi Arabia. Other than Michael Moore, nobody was pointing the finger.
Well, that's because Saudi Arabia has knuckled under.
Al Qaeda.
That's because Saudi Arabia accepted having its honest leaders murdered or sidelined in the wake of the 9/11 coup. Just as in Pakistan, General Musharraf has gone public about how Bush threatened to nuke Pakistan back to the Stone Age if Musharraf didn't obey Bush's orders in the wake of 9/11. It was the same in Saudi Arabia, exactly the same situation. 9/11 was orchestrated by the Israelis in order to stop the rise of independent Muslim power in the region here, and also in the United States, where Sami al-Arian had put George Bush in the White House by mobilizing the Muslim vote in favor of Bush.
There is some evidence that Ramzi Youssef was working with the Israelis, and he's really the guy that made the plot for the first World Trade Center bombing in '93. He's the nephew of KSM, and he's the one that gave him the idea for the Bojinka plot. It's very similar to September 11th. He's in prison in Colorado, but that was the progenitor of the whole thing. And the Israelis 100% knew the whole plot. And it's not like they didn't share it with the US.
And they blew up the World Trade Center. I mean, obviously, the Israelis were the ones who blew up the Trade Center, right?
Well, it's a combination of three different things. One, they put a team in there to sabotage the fire prevention system that should maximize damage from fire. Two, you have airplanes hitting the buildings, creating a fireball. And then there is evidence of truck bombs in the basement by our own police reported finding vans full of bombs. They pulled them out of the Church of Days, and they made a makeshift headquarters in the Meadowlands out of a sporting goods store where they brought these vans in and scanned them, found traces of explosives. You have the dancing Israelis driving around in a similar van with the same markings on it, who were, at Doric Towers filming the event, just as or before the first plane hit, by showing their pictures. Witnesses said they were high-fiving and hugging each other, and there, the video camera, which was never found, but the witnesses saw it. They had already gone to white glove movers. The Israelis had 6 different moving companies in the area, following these guys around, monitoring everything they did. They weren't there to stop them. They're there to prevent local authorities from catching them. They were protected.
But wait, you're not saying that the demolitions of every WTC prefix building, but most notably the towers in Building 7, were accomplished by mere truck bombs in basements?
That's what you have evidence for.
Well, yeah, I mean, Willie Rodriguez, of course, talked about the people who were horrifically injured by the bombs that exploded in the basements before the planes hit.
The basement levels are a parking garage. And so what's in a parking garage? Cars. So they are going to boom, boom, boom when those cars start blowing up, especially if you put a bomb in a truck next to parked cars full of gasoline, they're going to blow up. The idea was supposed to be to collapse the lobby into the basement so that people couldn't get out. Fortunately, it didn't work. There's a lot of damage, and this is on videotape from firefighters, of the panels blown off the wall and glass broken and things in the lobby, but it was still intact and people got out of the building. Had that fallen into the basement levels, you'd be looking at a death toll around 55,000 instead of 3. And that's your Pearl Harbor event. Fortunately, it didn't work.
So how about the final demolitions? For instance, well, with Building 7, of course, we have testimony that the destruction of Building 7 was pre-announced not only famously by CNN and BBC, who both announced the destruction of Building 7 20 minutes before it happened. Actually, I think CNN was a little more than that. And that we also have
There's actually a report at around 10:45 in the morning of a 50-story building going down. Now, they didn't say it was a Sullivan's building or Building 7. They just said a 50-story building has also fallen. It hadn't and wouldn't for another 5 or 6 hours.
What do you think happened there?
Jane Stanley did say it with it in the background behind her. That was a pretty big screw up by BBC. But her co-host had said a few minutes before that, we're getting reports that Building 7 is fallen or has fallen. He wasn't sure. And it wasn't hit by a plane, but it was hit by another building. You had Building 1 fall on it. It was on fire.
No. Nothing fell on it. The towers exploded outward symmetrically into small pieces. So yes, a few small pieces may have hit Building 7, but we have testimony from people who actually were in the building at the time. That was Barry Jennings and Michael Hess, his boss, who were actually in Building 7. Because the whole emergency response should have been directed.
Yeah, Barry Jennings heard Building 1 blow up
From the 23rd floor of Building 7. That was the New York Emergency Management Center, where if there's any emergency in New York, that's where you run the response. So everybody was supposed to be there, and a bunch of them got the memo that they weren't supposed to go there, but Jennings and Hess didn't get the memo. So they went up there to the 23rd floor command center, where everybody should have been running the whole city response to 9/11, and nobody was there. And there were half-eaten sandwiches and steaming cups of coffee around the table, but no people. So they called and they were told, get out immediately. So they started heading down the stair, and boom, huge explosions went off, ripping the stairwell out from under them. They ended up trapped in there for, I don't know, an hour or something. They then were later rescued by the NYPD. And Jennings described,
corner of the building was missing.
Right.
Every single floor was on fire by that afternoon.
Right, but
what these people do is they'll film the 22nd floor at 9:30 in the morning and say, look, there's only pockets of fire. It's bullshit. That whole building was on fire and the southwest corner was missing. It was definitely going down. Not one person was shocked when it fell.
Yeah, Hess and Jennings described bombs going off in Building 7. They did not describe any kind of damage from towers.
They
So
heard what they heard was explosions, because there were explosions. You had cars blowing up in the parking garage.
no, they didn't hear that the stairwell was destroyed under them. They were barely able to scramble
Yeah,
back up the stairwell after the
said
stairwell
they
below
were
them.
building one.
Right. And of course, Jennings was then apparently murdered. He had mysterious death with undetermined causes, either murder or put in witness protection in 2008, I believe, when the long delayed Building 7 report finally came out. But anyway, so long story short is that you're not so sure that where I would really differ from you.
No, I just don't care. It's like if someone burned your house down, it doesn't matter if they use kerosene or gasoline. You want to know who burned your house down and why. And we have a lot of evidence for that. It doesn't matter if they use truck bombs or they use truck bombs and C4 on every floor or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay. I agree with that. I agree with a lot of this discussion we're having.
It matters though when you keep saying shit that's totally ridiculous. Like you have an active building with people in and out of it every day and working there. You cannot go around and place shape chargers on every floor and no one see them and them sit there. If it's discovered, the whole plot is down the toilet. And it's not necessary. If you blow up the bottom, the whole thing falls.
Everyone else has done nothing but look at physics. So I said, I'm not looking at that. We have evidence of truck bombs and airplanes. That is enough. And sabotaging the fire prevention systems. We know those guys. We know their names, and they went to jail. And the star witness in the case, Catherine Smith, was murdered the day before the trial. And Khalid Odala from Jerusalem, the ringleader of the entire thing, got a $250,000 bail paid by somebody.
Right now, he has no idea what I'm talking about. This is the first time he ever heard this.
They let him out, and that wasn't on a trucker's salary.
Okay, well, we're in the same general ballpark here. A lot of what you're saying reminds me of the stuff that first kind of got me into this, and a lot of other people too. Not these Ahmeds.
The only reason the physics matter, it doesn't really matter if there's a bomb on this floor or not, but it does matter to admit there are airplanes. Because if you get rid of that part of the story, the entire paper trail back to state-sponsored Al-Qaeda is gone.
Right, which is why the perpetrators have to create either actual airplane crashes or a convincing simulation thereof. The argument is whether the way to convince the world that planes have crashed in these buildings, causing the buildings to collapse, would be by actually crashing planes into the buildings, or by somehow simulating it. And I go with Bob Bowman.
No, but the big risk is not, like you said at the beginning, you actually need to do this because simulating it's way harder than just crashing the plane into the building.
There we agree. And I'm going to get flack from the no planers in my audience, but sorry, I think
the no planers, dude. These people are room temperature IQ Muppets. Like, they don't know anything. They've memorized stuff from Loose Change and Alex Jones. They're not real researchers. You're not going to get adults to take you seriously if you're denying airplanes. The people, the family members on those planes are dead. They're not a bunch of crisis actors.
Yep. And the research, point us to what do you think is the best written source for that?
The government. And that's how we have a lot of the information we have on 9/11 is because of the victims' families' lawsuits. The victims' families, because there were victims. They murdered those people on Flight 11, 175, 93, 77. They're dead.
Yeah. Well, I've had this argument because I know some no planers. Or not all. They're not all room temperature IQ. Some of them are quite smart people, but I think they've gone down the wrong rabbit hole there. Well, let's see. We've where are we here? We're at least
any smart person pushing that is just grifting to get money off all the morons.
No. I know.
There's no way there's no way an intelligent.
It's kind of surprising,
especially New York.
Yeah, back in the day when this whole these debates were getting going, I remember Nico Haupt was this character in New York who was the lead disseminator of the No Planes in New York line, and I quickly discovered that he was highly unreliable, obnoxious, obviously messing with the minds of the New York 9/11 truth movement, and so I tended to dismiss Also, he was making bad arguments as well.
How many of these people mention the Israeli role?
Some, but not all. Then around 2007-8, in the wake of response to the Scholars for 9/11 Truth, which I was a part of, there was a new sort of resurgence of this no plane thing. And at that point, it was who was it? There was that musician from Australia, and there were a number of these people who were pushing that. And again, it looked to me like a pretty disruptive force. That is, that the people who were pushing this were not conducting themselves in such a way as to enhance the 9/11 Truth Movement's chances of actually getting anything done.
When you say something accurate, you get banned on YouTube. Loose Change is on Netflix. Why?
Wait a minute.
Because it's not a threat to the system at all.
Yeah, Loose Change is not
They're an airplane
no planes in New York. They're
okay. They're a half
Pentagon and China. They're halfway there.
There's a Washington D.C. airplane, which is why that absolute trash could get millions of views on YouTube and be allowed on Netflix too, because it's not going to go anywhere. Because that whole film, the only thing they got right about 9/11 was the date.
Yeah, I don't think so. I would say that they got more right than wrong. I think Griffin got way more right than wrong. But I have, after having,
Griffin's another one that didn't know the architecture of the Pentagon. Never looked it up. And they don't have all these architects and engineers either. What they did is they just went and browbeat people and said anybody who agreed that there ought to be an independent investigation, they counted that as they agree with us. And they absolutely do not.
I was arguing from early on for getting architects and engineers to look at the Pentagon in the same way that they looked at the World Trade Center, and that never really happened.
They finally came around because what's his name? Something Chandler. I don't even know his name.
David Chandler.
They finally admitted plane hit. Like, wow, that only took you like 18 years or whatever when they finally are finally on entered the batter's box where it's like, okay, there's an airplane. I mean, god damn, we're so far in our own end zone because the public is so gaslit because they lie to them about everything, from COVID to whatever, to just everything, that they rightly doubt whatever the government says. That's good. The problem is that makes them ripe for charlatans because they're so willing to believe anything that isn't the official story. And so what happens is the official, unofficial story, where you have people denying airplanes. They're not talking about the anthrax attack at all. And they don't get into specifics where we have names of Israelis and Saudis that supported this terrorist attack.
Yeah, well, again, I would largely agree with the proviso that I think the Israelis were a lot more important in it than the Saudis. The Saudis were the junior partners to the extent they were being, they had their orders. By the way, did you know that the 15 Saudi alleged hijackers were sent to the United States on CIA snitch visas? There's a particular category of visa that is given to Saudis who
fast track program out of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Mike Springman complained about it earlier. And a lot of Al Qaeda are just like lackeys, like store clerks or street vendors and stuff that they scooped up. It's kind of like the Whitmer kidnapping. These completely expendable bottom feeders that are being used by the system.
Right, who are obviously not capable of doing the first successful airplane hijackings in decades, and then managing to fly those planes to targets at impossible speeds at which the world's best pilots probably couldn't be sure of hitting.
You don't need to be the world's best pilot to crash a plane. They got three
at 600 miles an hour.
They got three out of it. Wasn't
600 miles an hour at sea level. You do have to be a very good pilot to hit a target.
It wasn't 600 miles an hour.
It was actually. The Pentagon was 600 miles an hour, and I believe the trade towers one was around 600, and the other was like 540. So it was ridiculous speed.
The trade centers was in the 500s. The Pentagon was not. And it doesn't take a crack pilot to crash a plane, and they were not successful with 93, and they were not successful with 223. So it's supposed to be 5 airplanes, 5 different targets. They got 3 of them.
So remind us about 223.
Do you know that story? I mean, it got grounded since they grounded all the planes after the towers had fallen, the Pentagon had already been hit. It was shortly before or right after 93. But there was supposed to Al Qaeda tried to hijack another plane, but all the planes were grounded. So they came back on September 13th to do it again, because there was nothing on September 12th. All the planes are still grounded. So on September 13th, they got caught. 10 of them got arrested and 9 of them were let go. And the oddest thing was the pilot is the one they kept. He was a pilot, but he had an ID of a different pilot.
Mm-hmm. And where was this flight departing from, or what was its route?
I think it was Logan. I can look it up.
Huh.
Again, yeah, and so it was
Another
something up
Logan.
in the Northeast they were going to hit, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay.
So
it was weird because I'm like, wait, what do you mean? All these people got let go from what? How? Why? That story just sort of, and there was also a
what's the evidence?
Crashed a plane into Bank of America in Florida. There's just some little dinky like crop duster type level. That was just some kid inspired by 9/11 that did that on his own, apparently. But it was another story. But they squashed it because I, in my opinion, the stock market and Boeing and everyone else were so afraid of any subsequent attempted hijackings or crashes after 9/11, because if that happened again on the 13th and the 14th, no one would fly again. And so they picked very little media about it. But I mean, ABC covered it. Like, it wasn't a secret. It's just so much news was on, showing the buildings hit over and over again, that what happened in the subsequent days was like, you might as well have been talking to the wall. No one was paying attention to anything else.
How about the Israelis arrested trying to blow up the Parliament building in Mexico City?
That didn't get any airtime either. And hey, if there's anything the Israelis did, they could do that now and it wouldn't get any airtime.
Yeah, they probably are.
The Sears building too. They cased they had a grenade, is what you're talking about. They were Israeli agents caught like filming the Sears Tower, and it was some suspicious things too. And they were spying on the DEA. They had hundreds of spies that got rounded up. They definitely had foreknowledge. And again, one of the alleged pilot of Flight 93 had family in Israeli intelligence. Then they get the black box from Flight 93. They played it in the Moussaoui trial. And Ziad al-Jarrah is not the pilot of the plane. We know because the other hijackers are screaming out al-Ghamdi's name, saying up, up, down, down. Like, obviously they know who's flying the plane, and they are yelling at that guy, not al-Jarrah. Al-Jarrah might not have even been on that plane.
Well, what do you make of the
footage?
fact?
I'm going through security, and by the way, guess whose passport they found in Shanksville? Ziad al-Jarrah with a little corner burn.
Yeah, sure. Jarrah is definitely one of the ridiculously suspicious chameleon characters there. Like I said, Jay Kolar's article about him that appears in the Paul Zaremka compilation that was published by Elsevier, Europe's leading academic publisher. That particular chapter in Zaremka's book, Jay Kolar's What We Now Know About the Alleged 9/11 Hijackers, is a very good source, and that includes pictures of the federal ID and so on of Ziad Jarrah, showing that it's obviously 3 different people. And as you say, Ziad Jarrah came from a family in Lebanon that's well known to be involved in, let's just say, narcotics trafficking under the supervision of Israeli gangsters. And so, yeah, we could go on about that, but that's been a great conversation. We should maybe have a few more like this.
Jarrah's ex-wife was living in Brazil and providing finances for Israeli spies on the DEA.
Yeah, right.
It's like, God, it doesn't matter, because like, where do you go with the information? It's like the Epstein list. I released that over 100 times, and everyone on Twitter right now is release the files, like right here.
Yeah. So what are the surprises in the Epstein client list?
Nothing surprised me, man. It's going to show up. I hope everyone knows who Lex Wexner is. Wexner was the
sugar daddy. Yeah.
It's nothing like, everyone wants it to be Tom Hanks and a bunch of celebrities, and it just isn't. It's a bunch of boring hedge fund and banker like businessmen and politicians. There's not, I mean, there's some exciting names like Clinton, obviously, and maybe Prince Andrew. And I guess everybody did hear about that. But Jess Staley and Glenn Dubin and Larry Summers is on there, you know, Conrad Black, Michael Steinhardt, Wexner, Bill Richardson, George Mitchell. I mean, that's a governor.
Well, these are people you want to control if you're going to control the world, right?
Well, yeah, but that's what Maxwell's little organization was doing. But, you know, I have 3 pages of this. I put the first page up. You can't see my wall, but there's a map right there of the whole thing. I even put it on the back of a t-shirt. It's been out since 2019 because I was canceled on everything for 20 years. And it doesn't matter. I even gave it to Kanye. Like, maybe he'll say it. You know, he's nuts.
Like, well, you know, when I first saw it,
they need the TV or the monitor to tell them the exact same thing because people are authoritarian. They're waiting for Tucker Carlson to say it. Like Tucker Carlson, I think he mentioned Reid Hoffman, who is on this list. But there's so many other people on here, and they're not going to touch it because there are 14 billionaires on this list. 14 on the first page, actually. Let me see if there's else. Let me label that. 16 on the first 2 pages. Billionaires.
Okay.
You know, Leon Black from a Global Apollo had to pay out the nose. So did JP Morgan, Stanley, and they had and Deutsche Bank had to pay $75 million. So there's over $400 million, and then Prince Andrew had to pay $16 million in his settlement with Virginia Giuffre. So you're looking at, you know, over $400 million in lawsuits from the Epstein ring. Jean-Luc Brunel was arrested. Maxwell's arrested. Epstein himself was arrested. Some of the others had mysterious deaths. So like punishment has been dished out. It's not like the clients and the girls are some giant mystery. It's just people don't fucking read. And they're like, look, it's not ever going to be on TV. They're not going to come out and say, here's all the perverts on the Epstein, because it's them. They're not going to tell on themselves. I promise you that isn't happening. They're not going to release anything.
Impunity for the ruling class, the ruling circles, has been around for a long time. So where do you have a link? Do you have a link that I can post with the write-up to this show to the digital version of the client list?
antineocon.com.
Okay, cool. So we will post that, and people can look at this client list themselves. Somebody should publish like an annotated version of that, like really getting into some of the details about some of the people on the list and why.
I did a 9.5-hour video. Yeah, going to every bastard on that list.
There you go.
I did a series of Sean Atwood, and they erased it. They pulled it from YouTube. They took down his whole channel. They gave it back to him if he would agree to erase all the videos he did with me. So he did.
Really? Wow. Well,
it's on Odyssey, but like no one looks at Odyssey. You know, Odyssey and Rumble are like, whatever. Like it has to be on YouTube, and it ain't, and it never will be.
Yeah. I got scrubbed from YouTube. When was it? 2019 or something, or 2020? I guess it was 2020, like after COVID. So, all right. Well, let's
2008.
Well, I'll bring you back on my show a fair number of times. I may not totally agree with you about every last detail of 9/11 or anything else, but I have to respect your research and your mastery of some of this material. And I think you're actually right about a couple of the things that my audience is going to give me a hard time about. So anyway, moving on to Trump and the possibility of any significant changes happening. As I said in the opening segment, Trump is being cast by some as, he's going to reveal the Kennedy dossier. He's ordered the declassification of the JFK files, and then supposedly UFO files. And then some are saying, maybe 9/11 too, and so on and so forth. We've got this peace initiative with Putin. So why is this all bullshit?
I don't think he's an angel or a devil. I think he's a politician, which is probably a little bit closer to a demon, but
a lot closer.
Look, he's doing some good things as far as some of his enemies are our enemies, but he grabs his ankles for Israel so hard. You know, it breaks the sound barrier. The guy is getting out of Ukraine, but only because he wants to pivot to Iran. And when he said, we're going to own Gaza and just build condos and have people move in, they go, what do you mean? Like the people of Gaza move back? I don't think they'd want to go back. Wait a second. What is this? The Trail of Tears and another Indian reservation? And he's talking about putting them in Jordan and stuff. That is straight out of Netanyahu's mouth. Like,
right. But well, wait.
You relocate all the Palestinians to Jordan. That's
right. But is that actually a real plan, or is that a pressure point?
It's not feasible.
Yeah, of course
They're not going to go. Yeah,
right.
but
And so somebody knows
that is
that.
a plan. It's not a very good
Well,
plan,
well,
but it's something he said on national TV.
I don't know. I think it's a Trump crazy Trump blurt out, but I think its purpose would be to supposedly, to pressure the Saudis and the other regional actors into, oh, well, do you have a better plan? And then ultimately they're going to probably go with that plan. But the problem is it's a rock and a hard place because the regional actors can't afford anything less than the Israelis basically agreeing to the whole Camp David peace process, withdrawal from the 1967
And you know
land.
what? I will agree to relocating the Palestinians if it's to Tel Aviv.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Gazans probably would agree with that too. They all lost property. They've all had.
I am for a
property stolen.
two-state solution.
Yeah,
Palestine and Brooklyn.
there you go. Yeah. Okay. Amen. So, but
God's chosen lunatics to be like, well, because Jacob wrestled with an angel and God gave us this
why
land.
do you hate Brooklyn?
It's already screwed, so whatever.
All right. So,
I don't think Brooklyn's fixable.
Yeah. I think that would make a good Jewish state. I've always advocated the Jewish autonomous zone on the border of Russia and Mongolia. That's the world's oldest Jewish state, and Jewish
you don't have
autonomous
to go
zone.
anywhere. Like, you don't have an ethno state. You live together like every other country in the world.
Yeah. Well, they say every other ethnicity in the world has their ethno state. Why shouldn't we have ours? Well, wait a minute. That's not true. There are perhaps 5,000 plus ethnicities in the world, maybe 10 or 20,000 if you count it that way. And how many of them have their own ethno state? Hardly any. I mean, there are almost no ethno states. And so, and the only hardcore, serious genocidal ethno state on Earth right now is so-called Israel.
Yeah,
but I mean, they're special. They're chosen. Yeah,
they never should have been. You should not. I can't believe after World War II they thought annexing land was a good idea.
Yeah, it's
after what that did with the Treaty of Versailles in World War I. Like, let's do that again.
Mm-hmm.
Bravo.
Right. So bring it back to the changes we're seeing right now. We've got this multipolar world emerging. U.S. basically has admitted it's been defeated by Russia. Although it did defeat the Europeans, which was probably the real point of that war, and the Europeans haven't figured that out yet, apparently. But the world is definitely spinning out of American control to a large extent. And some would say that all of this chaos around Trump, even given that Trump is owned by the Zionists.
I don't think the U.S. lost to Russia. I mean, what did they lose? They destroyed an economic power rival by gutting Europe and weakening Russia while nothing to themselves.
Well, Russia isn't coming out of this weaker, is it?
Could care less how many Ukrainians died.
To what extent is that? We just actually heard from there was a well-known Jewish mainstream commenter. Oh yeah, Emmanuel Todd, the European historian and anthropologist, and so a very interesting guy. Anyway, he opined that one of the reasons that people like Anthony Blinken were so eager to spill Ukrainian blood and fight to the last Ukrainian is ethnic grudges. That is, that Blinken's Jewish ancestors were persecuted by the evil Slavs in
Victoria Nuland had a blood libel too.
Yeah, I suppose.
What it was is, I'm going to get this out again. I really don't like re-explaining stuff. And I know it's fine. It's first time on your show, but Israel wanted Syria. They failed in Syria at first because Russia intervened. And they realized we cannot get rid of Assad or annex land and take the rest of the stolen heights until we can divorce Assad from Russia. And so if you can handcuff Russia to Ukraine, then they cannot intervene in Syria. And what happened after Russia was locked to Ukraine?
Mm-hmm.
The Turkish HCS took over Syria in 12 days.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there was even
and the whole reason to get Syria
was a quid pro quo.
Stop the land bridge to Hezbollah.
Right. So there was a quid pro quo where the Americans, the Zionist-owned Americans, tell Russia, okay, yeah, you can have Ukraine, but we're taking Syria.
Well, Russia had security interests with Ukraine. They cannot allow NATO-backed and armed forces right up on their border. They already dealt with 2 CIA-backed Chechen revolts. They were not going to allow that in the Donbass. And they were intervening on a civil war. Zelensky broke the Minsk II Accords. So he started that. And 7 days later, Russia starts their SMO. What would any other nation do? Or let's say Russia put missiles in Cuba, for example. Oh, that's not hypothetical. That happened. And we had the Bay of Pigs.
How about Canada? What if Canada needs some Russian help to defend it against Trump's threats, and it starts putting first strike missile systems right up on the border of the United States?
You mean the border? Don't you mean the 51st state?
Well, I'm assuming Canadians.
What would Governor Trudeau do? Yeah, I mean, if China or Russia or somebody put weapon systems in Canada or Mexico, they would be invaded immediately. I mean, of course.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so how about the Russia emerges from this in fairly good shape? Maybe not, Syria doesn't. But isn't the long-term prognosis for the Zionist-owned Western Empire pretty grim overall? That is, what evidence do we have that it's, this trajectory in which the U.S. share of global GDP and especially manufacturing and technology just keeps going down, 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 down. It was 50% after World War II. It's like less 15% now. Given that trajectory, the rise of China, it's happening at a really amazing pace. How long will it be before it won't matter whether the U.S. and their Israeli owners can like impose this or that terrorist on Syria or whatever? The region will be empowered by the balance of forces in the world to take back its stolen property.
Now, I mean, if you take out the Shia resistance, there's really nothing left. Because all the house Arabs, as I like to call them, they're not lifting a finger. Every single Sunni-run nation, like Turkey, backed the terrorists in helping Israel take Syria. And the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Saudis, they're not going to do anything. The resistance is Yemen, Iran, somewhat Iraq, and Lebanon, and it used to be Syria. And really just the Hezbollah portion of Lebanon. That, they're taking them out one at a time. They took out Syria. They'll go after Yemen next. They're going to win. And what you just said, assumes U.S. national interests, and that's not how the world works. In the U.S., manufacturing, tech, down, down, down. But the oligarchs that run the show, their profits have gone up, up, up. And they could care less about the common living standard of Americans.
Right, but what about the overall distribution of power in the world? I've been, recently reading some accounts.
Their economy's up by trillions, and they have the most powerful military and the third largest population, and everyone uses the dollar as reserve currency. They're not going anywhere.
Well, I was.
I know these fantasies like the dollar will pop tomorrow. It will not.
Yeah, I mean, there were British who were saying the British Empire wasn't going anywhere during, the late 19th and the first half of the 20th century, and it did go somewhere.
America is just British people. I mean, but
okay. Well, I see World War II as an American conquest of the British Empire in rather the same way that this so-called war on Russia through Ukraine was an American conquest of the European Union. In both cases, they basically economically stripped their big competitor. And
Churchill destroyed all the colonial powers. Not that was his intent.
Yeah,
but you saw the fall of the French Empire and the British Empire. Everybody fell apart.
And Churchill was largely, set up to do that and tricked into it by Roosevelt, and then Roosevelt's backers, of course, which included a lot of wealthy people of a certain ethnicity. But the point being that British power had been hollowed out. That is, just as the rise of Germany and Russia during the 19th century posed a big problem to the British Empire, by the mid 20th century, the forces of production in the world were such that there's just no way this empire is going to continue.
The British Empire was based on mercantilism and controlling the sea trade. The Americans are locked in so much more because they have a global reserve currency. And that's not so easily replaced. And people are like, well, BRICS will make an alternative. No. The dollar is backed by labor of 300 million people. And it's very easy to liquidate, and it's very easy to exchange, and that's why people accept it. It's not a rule; no one forces you to use dollars, but everybody does.
But again, how long? How long would that last? For the pound sterling ruled the world, until the forces of real production changed and didn't back the pound sterling anymore in the same way that it
The
has.
sterling behind the sterling.
Right.
Yeah, it's not going away anytime soon. Like nothing lasts forever.
Mm.
So centuries from now, something will happen, whatever. But if you're looking at it, the dollar's not going away in our lifetime.
Well, that's good news personally for me, since I'm retired in Morocco and drawing what money I draw, including Social Security pretty soon, in US dollars.
That one is a little shaky, the Social Security.
Yeah, that part, the Social Security part is shakier than the dollar part, you're saying. Yeah, maybe
For
so.
sure.
I don't know.
God, they've wasted so much money. And that's like the only good things Trump has done is gutting USAID. I don't think he realized what that did when he did that, but whatever. And yeah, getting rid of
He gutted
federal
the CIA.
employees, getting rid of, well, it is an outfit of the CIA. I mean, they started way back in the 70s. It was already reported they were financing paramilitary in Laos and setting up a processing plant for heroin. I mean, they called it a Pepsi plant. It wasn't Pepsi. And it wasn't Pepsi Cola. It had nothing to do with it. They just did it under their name. But that's always been, they did it with United Fruit because they needed irradiator trucks and because they were smuggling uranium. I go, no, this is just for apples. and
Yeah.
and it was on the board, Dulles. And then he works for the CIA later. What a coincidence. But yeah.
Okay, so let's reframe the question. So all of your views pretty much so far I would rate as at the very least plausible. In many cases,
like I really wish the U.S. empire would fall apart, and but these are fantasies. Like
right.
They won in Syria.
Well, let me. Yeah. I get it.
Different Muslims to kill each other. Yeah, and they got all these refugees that flooded Europe, and they made money off the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Ukraine, they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. They divorced Russia from Germany, which is what they wanted, so they don't have an economic power rival from either one of them. They did kill some number of Russians, completely destroyed Ukraine, which affected grain prices, And the dollar's been fine. They kicked Russia off of SWIFT. Now, Putin's been making some moves. He's made some great moves. It is a multipolar world now. It's not like the, say, 1992 American power. It's not that level of, invincibility. And a lot of it's because the U.S. has drained its treasury and soldiers fighting forever wars in the Middle East on behalf of Israel.
Absolutely. I agree with all of that. Quick, let's reframe it now and think about, okay, so in your scenario here, U.S. empire keeps striding or at least limping along. It's not going to die for quite a while. And question is, what ideology / elite group is going to run it? Now, there's a famous generational theory that Strauss and Howe are associated with that argues that every 80 years,
Leon Strauss?
No, a different Strauss. Yeah, it's a very different Strauss. Yeah. No relation, I don't think. Leo Strauss, of course, being the founder of neoconservatism, but we'll talk about that some other time. But no, the Strauss and Howe argue that from the Revolutionary War, which was really a very, very vicious, bloody civil war between colonists in 1780 or so, to the U.S. Civil War of 1860, 80 years later, another huge, bloody destruction of the previous world from which a new world had to be constructed, to then World War II, 1940, where a lot of destruction was exported. But once again, it was a massive conflagration and bloodbath out of which a whole new world had to be reconstructed by a heroic generation, right? Every 80 years, along comes a heroic generation to preside over a bloodbath that destroys the old order, and they have to rebuild a new order. And so here we are. It's actually 85 years, or 84, whatever. So here we are right at that moment. And I think Strauss died and Howe is still alive. And he just wrote a book saying, we're here, the fourth turning is here. And there's going to be a huge fight for the next, what the next regime is going to be. There's going to be some destruction out of which something new is going to emerge. Now, those who've tried to interpret this, they've all said, yeah, these guys were absolutely right. These guys were, like Peter Turchin, these guys are way ahead of their time saying what's going to, we're coming up to this huge crisis. It's going to destroy the established order and something new is going to come next. But what is it? And the two possibilities basically are that either, the Reds or the Blues just totally destroy the other. one of the two wins and presides over the new order that arises from the ashes of the old. And the question is it going to be the Reds? Is it going to be the Blues? Are the anti-Trump
I think
forces?
we're already seeing the cultural suicide of Europeans.
Mhm.
Like Europe used to be the predominant power. Now it's America, it's Russia, and then it's the Far East, China in particular, then the Middle East, then Russia, and then Europe.
I didn't see that
ahead of
coming,
Africa and Latin America.
Yeah.
That's about it. Like they're done. Germany and France.
Isn't that crazy? Like
destroyed themselves.
20 or 30 years ago, I thought Europe was going to be the next superpower. It's got
number
bigger
2.
population, bigger GDP. It's immensely more sophistication, much better education. It's got the U.S. beat in so many ways. I thought Europe was going to take over the world, and look at what we're
full of Europeans.
Yeah.
I agree with Macon on that. There are two kinds of Europeans: the smart ones and the ones who stayed behind.
Yeah, that's probably a slight exaggeration. I don't know.
They call Americans dumb, and they're like, okay, let's look at my entire life. Like since I've been alive, what has happened over there? You guys lose every time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, they're like, you lost in Vietnam. I'm like, who lost? They lost 2 million people. America got rid of 55,000 expendables. They people the lowest rungs they didn't give a damn about. Bell Helicopter made bank. The CIA got the air. I call it the war of helicopter and heroin. You're looking like the goal, the purpose of the war isn't to win or to liberate or whatever. Like we're gonna save the Kurds. Like they said, the point of war is profiteering, and from that metric, they absolutely were victorious. They destroyed nations, got very wealthy on it, and didn't lose any of their own or any of their own kids.
But wait a minute, wasn't the economic malaise, as Jimmy Carter called it, of the 1970s partly the result of? I mean, we're taught, what I was taught in American economic history class at the University of Wisconsin in the 1970s was that Johnson couldn't pay for both the Great Society and the Vietnam War, and that crunched the American economy, leading to those terrible doldrums of the 1970s.
You had gas lines in the 70s because American support for Israel after the Yom Kippur. And that's why OPEC and Saudi Arabia got together, because they were the principal leader of OPEC, and created the oil embargo and shut America down. That's why by 76, George Bush Sr. brought the Saudis into the pre-existing American-Israeli axis and broke the cartel and broke OPEC. Because if you have the Saudis, which are sitting in the world's largest oil reserves, OPEC doesn't work. Mm-hmm. But that was the effect on the economy. Vietnam was over by 75. And they spent a lot of money. Obviously, the CIA went in there.
They bankrupted Fort Knox.
But what you got to see is who lost money. Like they didn't lose their money; they spent your money.
Right, but if they're gangster parasites who are sucking blood out of the imperial machine and they're making money, that doesn't mean that the imperial machine is actually benefiting from having blood sucked out of it, does it? I mean, this is why Russia can defeat, the U.S. and Europe in Ukraine, is partly that the Western military is all about parasitical profiteering, whereas the Russian military is lean and mean, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's true because the U.S. builds weapons they add every bad, like the Bradley fighting vehicle. That's so bad they made a movie about it. And they add all these bells and whistles. They don't make sense. But they do have things that work too, like F-16s and things of that nature. They have both types of weapons. Ironically, the best weapons America ever made were during the Cold War. Everything after that has been absolute ass because they don't have real threats. So they're just making stuff to create jobs in different districts. And it doesn't matter if it works or doesn't work. No one's going to fight the United States anyway. But I don't think what Russia's is winning the war in Ukraine, no doubt. It's like a 7-to-1 ratio of kills they're winning. But they're having some trouble with 4 Oblast. They're not going to take over Europe, much less the United States. If you can't cross the Dnieper, you're not going to get across the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, well,
because they don't have people.
Well, of course.
They don't have enough. Their army, they have mobilized, and it took years to do. And so you're getting up to 400,000 or so, but you'd be facing millions.
Yeah,
and
nobody in their right mind
thinks this thing like, well, Russia can beat Europe. I'm like, Russia can beat Ukraine, and they can beat the little proxy forces. The weakness of Ukraine is the manpower. They cannot replace their soldiers. That's why they're losing. Weapon to weapon, there is almost tit for tat. I mean, they're very good with the drones. They don't have Russia has better artillery. Russia has better they've got hypersonic missiles, but the Ukraine has better anti-ship weapons too. I mean, there's Neptune sunk the Russian flagship. They ever harass them at sea, it will. They have each one has different things where they can win on different fields. On the Russian Navy isn't much. Crossing rivers, not very good at it. That's why they had to withdraw out of Kherson. Like, they are winning, but Ukrainians are fighting hard, and this is not an easy fight. Now we know it's not just Ukrainians because there's Polish mercenaries, and they're getting unlimited money from Europe, the United States, and weapons. They're with French tanks, Storm Shadows from the Brits, Patriot missiles, all that stuff. It's not Ukrainian. Those are NATO weapons. Mostly what they did, though, is they dumped in their obsolete gear. Like the whole first year and a half, it was like in-laws and javelins and stuff. They're just cleaning out inventory so they could justify replacing it and spending more money to do that. It's not about winning the war. It's about prolonging that thing as long as possible so they can profiteer. And they just keep it even. When they wanted to, they went and they took Kharkiv and all. They took all this territory in a matter of weeks. And they said, pump the brakes. We can't win.
Right. And see, all of this,
it's over.
Yeah,
so keep it going.
Right. All these policies you're describing.
I promise you, America
whether
could
it's
definitely fall all the way to Moscow.
Whether it's the U.S. empire spending $8 trillion on Israel's wars in the Middle East, or whether it's these wars that don't really need to be won, aren't really being fought to be won in whether Vietnam or Ukraine or what have you, this kind of gross wastefulness, this kind of it's a luxury that the U.S. has because it's not it has enough power vis-a-vis the rest of the world that can get away with stupid self-destructive actions. But at some point, you get away with those until you don't. And again, I argue that the balance of forces in the world is changing in such a way that the U.S. will no longer be able to afford these kinds of actions, and it will have to fight in a much more strategic way, like the Russians are now.
If you had Russia and Europe together, which it's the opposite right now, or you had Russia and China together, that would be an actual force that could stand up to the U.S.
Well, we do, don't we? Isn't
having economically little, but Russia's very weary of arming China because China's got billion plus people. They've got the economy, they've got the manpower. They don't have the weapon systems and gear. Russia does. You don't hand that to them when you share a border that long with the Chinese. You just ask them for it. Because China didn't. Why do they care about Russia's national interests? China can win by doing nothing.
Mm-hmm. Well,
they can watch everyone else destroy themselves and just stay doing what they're doing.
Well, the Trump administration claims that some of those people are all about pivoting to China. We've been hearing about this pivot to China since the Obama administration.
It's going to be Iran.
You think it's going to be Iran? Yeah, that's possible. Although
look at his cabinet.
Now, if I were in the shoes of the leaders of Russia and China, both of whom are to some extent threatened by this unhinged Zionist-occupied U.S. imperial monster, I would say, let's defeat the Americans someplace away from us where we don't have to take the damage. Let's defeat the Americans in the Middle East. And so if I were in charge, I would be like sneaking miniature nuclear weapons to resistance forces in the Middle East. I'd be sneaking, whatever kind of the very best possible military technology that they can get in there under the radar and provide deniable but extremely powerful support, ultimately including very serious WMD, presumably like mini nukes. We know the Chinese have already given Iran massive amounts of anti-ship missiles, so Iran does have the ability to close the Red Sea, which of course
they sold them. They didn't give them,
or the Persian Gulf rather. Yeah, sold them, right.
They got money for that.
Yeah. There's money going back and forth, or oil, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, my take on this would be that the Zionists are going to convince the Americans, to the extent there is such a thing as Americans anymore, that, let's go beat up on Iran for Israel. We got to finish them off, like Bibi says. And if they do that, that's going to provide a perfect opportunity for Russia and China to do under the radar support for the local.
What if the deal with Russia is we're going to withdraw all support from Ukraine and you win that war, but you stay out of the conflict with Iran?
well, the Americans might like that, but the Russians either would have leverage to either say no to it, or they could say yes while slipping suitcase nukes to the Iranians.
No. If Iran uses a nuke, they will get nuked into oblivion. Like, that's not a good scenario.
Right,
The
but
better
see that would
it's
deter
the ballistic
deter
missiles
their-
that can pepper Israel. That's the better deterrent.
Mhm.
And the other deterrent is just to blow up the northern oil fields of Saudi Arabia and put the whole world on lockdown.
Exactly, and that's what
Because also close the Strait of Hormuz. Like, they've got a lot of options. An attack on Iran just won't work. Like, even if you beat them, you lose.
Yeah,
Because
well,
in
that's what
every
that
scenario,
Millennium Challenge.
you go down with them. They're like, okay.
Yeah, the Millennium Challenge war game.
You're going
Remember,
down with us.
early 2000s Millennium Challenge war game. General Riper ran the Iranian forces and thoroughly trounced the Americans. And since then,
they said,
war with
"You're not
Iran has
allowed to
been
use that
unstarted.
tactic." He's like, "Why not? It's doable. Why wouldn't they think of it? I did." Yeah.
Right. Well, let me get back to the. You didn't really answer that question of where the red versus blue battle is going. We just had the red forces in Germany do pretty well in the elections. We have Trump and his people with Vance going to Germany and supporting AfD. We have a pretty big split during the among the elites. We have a counter elite, the Trumpian counter elite, in Peter Turchin's terms, that's creating a civil war among the elites of the West. And according to the generational theory of Strauss and Howe, it's got to be won by one side or the other, crushing the other side and creating a whole new dispensation. Which one's going to win? Will the anti-Trump forces of liberalism somehow crush Trump the way they thought they had after the insurrection of January 6th? Or will it be the other way around? Will the Trumpian red forces utterly crush and demolish liberalism and create some kind of new, almost like neo-fascist Western dispensation?
Well, the pendulum is going Trump's direction right now. Like, the woke forces peak was around 2021 with people wearing masks and stuff. I call that ultimate gay. Peak gay was 2021, spelled with an H. And it started to decline a little bit. A lot of it came from Elon, who is not he's got all his own faults, but there is a semblance of free speech on X. At least more than the Dorsey era, Like, I'm on there. I was never allowed on Twitter from 2009 to 2023. I wasn't allowed.
Now, quick question, Ryan. You're probably an expert here. Should I pay Elon something to get that whatever it is that means that they won't shadow ban me anymore? I think I've been shadow banned on Twitter.
Shadow ban you.
They'll still shadow ban.
Even if you pay, they shadow ban.
So I would be paying to be shadow banned.
You might get shadow banned slightly less, but if your account is, if you're you're definitely on Zog's list. So
I've been shadow banned for 15 years.
When I first got on, I quickly accumulated like 200,000 followers before they got to me, and I think I have like 260 something, 67, I think, thousand. But it's for the last 4 months to get even 1,000 followers. And ever since I opposed HTS, they really started. They like recognized me because. Day one, I went in and I banned the ADL, I banned the SPLC, Canary, all the people, and so I was invisible to them, and that's why I was allowed to grow. But I guess what they did is they got rid of blocking, so then they were all able to see me and go kvetch and complain, and now I'm shadow banned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
a whole lot of other people, they took their check marks away.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, because they argued with Elon about H-1B visas. Say, hey, let them, whatever. That's their opinion on H-1B. So what? He didn't like that.
Yeah, and so this whole free speech thing, I recently wrote a piece for American Free Press that hasn't been published yet, pointing out that the Trump team, which claims to be open, more open to free speech, is actually on the side of the biggest censors in the West, which is the Zionists, right? I mean, the worst and biggest offenses against free speech in the West, like somewhere between 90% and 99.9% of them are coming from the Zionists. And the Trump team is even worse in terms of censoring.
They're the only ones with laws to protect them from criticism.
Yeah. So some free speech. We're actually
it's such a canard. You're like, hey, quit shooting children. That's anti-Semitic.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, if you oppose genocide, you're
killing kids. But it works. They're,
Wow.
you know, right now they're saying October 7th deniers, like Holocaust denial. They're saying if you don't buy into the 40 beheaded babies and smothered a kid with the bare hands and, you know, raped them while people hid under corpses, whatever, then you're a denier. Now, no one denies that October 7th happened. What they deny is some of the outrageous exaggerations about, you know, decapitating babies.
That sounds a little bit like the Holocaust debate. Like it's
well, yeah, it's the same thing with the Holocaust. Like, I don't know anybody labeled a Holocaust denier that actually denies at all that people were killed in camps. It's a debate about the numbers or the methods, whatever. It's like, no. If you don't say that they were gas in ovens and turned into soap and furniture, then you don't believe it happened at all, which is ridiculous. That's reductive absurdity. Like, they were not turned into lampshades or wallets and shrunken heads. That is admitted psych warfare propaganda at Buchenwald, displayed on tables for the city of Weimar. They came in and it was straight up Billy Wilder. Like, they brought in Hollywood production crews to denazify the Germans with all this cartoonishly evil rhetoric. And you're like, well, why is that necessary? Murdering people is horrible. It is, but the Allies are guilty of the same crimes.
Well, they were probably worse. Yeah.
So you have to have something. I mean, they all tortured people. They all killed people. Everybody did that. Sad. And a lot of people starved to death and died of typhus and then got shot, worked to death,
Firebombed,
beaten, you know, whatever. Yeah, burned,
nuked, and firebombed.
You know, people were burned in Dresden and Tokyo and all too. And of course, there were nuclear weapons dropped twice on Japan. Like, it's not a pissing contest about evil. But if you're going to be like, oh, instead of everyone's horrible, it's you guys were extra bad because you made human pelvis ashtrays and stuff, the kind of the crap that came out. And you see this shit with October 7th too. Like, look, October 7th is an act of war. And I completely understand why, because you wrapped a wall around a population that you forced into a concentration camp through a Nakba with machine guns pointing at them. You murdered 233 Palestinians before October 7th in 2023. Were they supposed to just sit there and languish and die? They finally broke out of their cage and attacked Israeli soldiers and murdered them. And they did also grab civilian hostages. The majority of civilians that died on that day was handled directive from helicopter gunfire and tanks where the Israelis shot other Israelis.
And that's what they don't want you to know.
The event absolutely happened. Hamas and some other forces did attack and killed Israelis, caught them sleeping, that happened. Why it happened is a longer story, but no one denies it. But to call someone a denier because they won't talk, they won't espouse, David Ben Zion's 40 babies propaganda, or the mass rapes and playing football with women's breasts, like Rabbi Shmuley said they cut off their breasts and were playing catch with them. Like, that did not happen. That's made up, and it enrages the Israeli public and it makes them justify sniping a 3-year-old or blowing up a hospital, all the things they've actually blown up, the food trucks. They are guilty of every war crime there is. And I'll tell you this, I said this to Palatano too. The Israelis always say self-defense, self-defense. Ask them, what action could you do that would be considered offense? And then ask them, is there anything that Israel could do that if they did it, that would be a war crime?
Of course.
Because whatever they think of has already been done. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, if you don't join them in their lies, you're a Jewish atrocity propaganda denier. And you will be deplatformed, shadow banned, and so on and so forth. Well, all right.
I think state, it's not the Jews. It's Jewish supremacists. They're of that ilk, but you cannot blame what your government is doing on an ethnicity or a race. Like whatever the British did, whatever, that wasn't from their whiteness. Like the Irish are just as white. They didn't do it. It's not from DNA. It's from their ideologies.
Well, right, but isn't there a Jewish ideology
that worships a homicidal, genocidal psychopath that instructs you to kill your neighbors? It probably isn't going to produce the best, most healthy results.
Yeah, I agree. It's ideology, obviously not race and DNA. And
Right, it's
indeed,
not biology.
I don't know if you checked out Lauren Guyonneau's book From Yahweh to Zion, which is a critique of Jewish ideology through 3,000 years.
No, what's it called again?
It's From Yahweh to Zion. I
From
think
Yahweh to
he
Zion.
pretty much echoes your view of Yahweh's
Yahweh
religion.
was they stole a deity from the Sumerian pantheon of El. Yahweh was a low tier storm and chaos god, an evil character, and they decided he was the only god, and they were going to worship the bad guy. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why would you put all this esteem into a psychopath that forbid you from the tree of knowledge? Like, he wants you to be ignorant slaves, floods the world and sends fiery serpents to bite people, kills all the firstborn in Egypt, takes a human sacrifice from his follower, tortures another one. Like, this is not. I would challenge you to find the like demon, Loki, whatever bad character of any other faith and compare deeds to Yahweh and be less demonic than him.
Yeah, it sounds like you're going to be accused of neo-Marcionism by people like my good friend E. Michael Jones and other more Orthodox Christians who
is that Gnosticism with the demiurge and thing?
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think Yahweh
Yeah, Marcion
is a
was a Christian
God.
heretic. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm an atheist. Like I just say, like, I think God concepts are real in the way that like money is real. Technically, like physically, it's just paper. Like, is it though? Yeah, physically it's just paper, but it's not just paper. Because if we all accept that it means this unit of labor and you can has this much value and you can trade goods with it and stuff, then that does exist. Everything that exists isn't physical. Like, it doesn't have to have a physically existing counterpart. The ideas, religions are reflections of the cultures that invent them. And so your moral framework and your cosmology and all is an exaggeration out of your culture. And a sick culture will make a sick religion. And so if you have like newly freed slaves and all they know is master-slave relationships, then that will be reflected in the religions they invent. And that's clearly under Judaism. You have a master-slave relationship between Yahweh and his servants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would. I have a very different view of things after having had experiences with the paranormal in my youth, practices of Buddhist meditation, and then discovering the traditionalist school of thought, and ultimately coming to Islam. And sort of give you the short version of how my worldview probably differs from yours in the most basic way is that I think like Bernardo Kastrup wrote a great book called Why Materialism is Baloney. He's also written other defenses of philosophical idealism. And I've come around to that school. That is that the primordial reality is consciousness. And what we perceive as matter and space-time is an epiphenomenon of consciousness. And this is pretty much what quantum physics has figured out as well. So given that...
But that's what the Valentinians said too.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sethians.
Well, a lot of people have said it, and I think it's basically correct.
It's kind of really from... well, Plato in his ideal forms, Taoism takes a different route but gets the same result.
Yeah,
some phenomenologists with the way of empiricism get the same result. They all work. They all have different paths. Like the what is it, the pleroma or whatever that the different Gnostic sects believe in, like the center of light and knowledge and like a super consciousness, and that you are sparks of the divine. I've read all that, and yeah, there's a little bit of that in Zen Buddhism, but to me, it's just like poetic interpretations of people trying to figure out nature, and or even the natives with Mother Earth. Like, Earth did create life. Like, that's the one that actually did it. Life was not instantaneously put on the surface of Earth in 6 days. Like, it's a slow process, but you could think of it as a giant cell that evolved to make all the different life forms that are on it and sustain it. And where it's going, is there a teleology to that? Like Aristotle might say, like, is there some future, is there intention of what, okay, where are these going to evolve to do what? Colonize space, to do what? Who knows? But the specific like storm god type deities that you find in dispensationalist interpretations of Christianity or something, to me are outright asinine. Like,
Yeah, I agree.
Like that. I'm fine with the like Joseph Campbell kind of pan religiosity, whatever you find in Sufi Islam and Christian mystics, like might follow more Book of Thomas and Philip than they would, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, John's half and half, but whatever. I digress. But there are different takes on theology. But I just like, don't come at me with it. Don't act like I haven't studied it or anything either, because I have. And I live in East Asia, so I'm deep I was in Japanese Zen Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, all that. It's all fun stuff. Western philosophy too. And you can see a lot of overlap, especially with what you're saying about consciousness, that they just didn't have ways to articulate given what they knew at the time. But you're constantly getting more knowledge by studying nature. So you could say that it's kind of like the God things looking at themselves, because everything you have in your room right now, in my room, was already here. Like all this stuff was wood and rocks and material that was there from the beginning. And all you had to do to unlock it was to study nature. So you get what you get through knowledge, not through obedience. And these faiths that have like a God where virtue is placed in obedience rather than knowledge are a problem, because it's just a slave master, do as I say, or else, you burn in hell, whatever. That is such a like sophomoric, I'm going to say it, idiotic way of going about cosmology, to say there's just some egotistical brat that wants you to worship him and obey his rules. And it's like, no, you develop your consciousness through gaining and obtaining more and more knowledge, not through obedience. And doubt is the path to truth, not faith.
Yeah, well, I would argue in favor of a balance of faith and doubt, of obedience and knowledge, and so on. Although I think that obedience to the divine is better characterized not so much in terms of like obedience to a human master, although that's one way, but that's a kind of a low level.
I'd argue you're always obedient to the human master, because it's from the human master's mouth that they're claiming to be speaking on behalf of the divine, and they're not.
Right, and that's an interesting paradox in the Moroccan Sufi tradition, which I'm interested in. I used to study that back in the day until I got distracted by 9/11 in politics 25 years ago.
Sufis.
But the Sufi groups have that problem of having to totally obey their Sufi master, right? You do this total bayah or obedience thing to your Sufi master, but ultimately that is to get you to the place where you're getting a taste of the reality of God, which of course God being the only real master. But a better way to conceptualize that would be surrendering, ecstatic self-surrender to the mystery of the creator of the universe. That's what I think the word Islam actually means. And just for a taste of that, have you read?
Surrendering isn't knowledge, and it's not understanding. It's just obeying the master, which means you don't have any comprehension. You're just obeying the rules. If you don't get it, then you don't have it.
To Toshiko Isutsu is a Japanese guy who he learned something like 30 languages and wrote
polymath.
Yeah, he's a polymath who studied global religious traditions, and he wound up seeing, advocating a kind of an Eastern tradition that he thought the truths that had been discovered independently, pretty much by Taoists and other Buddhists, other Eastern mystics, were admirably summarized in Sufi Islam. And he ended up, being a bit of a Islamic studies expert. He spent some time, I think, with Henri Corbin and these other people in Tehran, right at that exciting time of the Islamic Revolution. Anyway, that's a long story. And I
think you're best suited to pursue empiricism and knowledge that you will unlock the secrets of nature through yourself, rather than commanding some deity to grant your wishes. through prayer or whatever. Prayer should only be to give gratitude and thanks, not to say, help my sports team win or give me this girl or give me riches. But you're going to get a lot further in life if you rely on yourself and you study nature for how it actually is to the best of your ability to uncover its secrets and advance technology scientifically. I think the scientific method's pretty good. Look at all the results versus the other side, which is just going in circles.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. However, I think that ultimately the surrender of the ego is really, in some ways, almost the purpose that we're here for. And so to the extent that it's the ego that worships itself and its bad version of itself in Yahwism, for example, and these other storm god traditions you described, that ego ultimately is limited by its own, narcissistic tendencies. And,
if you don't worship yourself, you just rely on your own abilities. Like, you should advance your abilities and study nature, and that's what we've been doing, and it works. But what you do is you constantly doubt what you come up with. That's why science isn't dogmatic. It says, no, this absolutely, we could find something else later, and this whole thing is wrong. But you don't get that with dogma. You can't. It has to be right, and it has to be right on the first try because it's supposedly divinely inspired. So that makes it rigid.
Absolutely.
Whereas you get rid of the divine and say, no, it's just from people, and people are flawed. And so we probably actually are wrong if you're an anti-realist, and we're constantly going to revise and improve through doubt.
Yeah, well, that's one of the differences between dogmatic approaches to religion and mystical ones. Mystical ones are based on actually having the religious experience and tasting the reality directly. And to do that, doubt is actually quite useful. Hera, or doubt, is one of the highest stations on the Sufi path, for example. And so there is that dialectic between total surrender to something beyond the greatest imaginable authority, surrender to reality with a capital R, which is what Islam means. And that's a kind of obedience. But then there's also that path of doubt and confusion and perplexity, because, of course, Allahu Akbar, the transcendence of God or ineffability of God, is that whatever you're calling God is always beyond the greatest conception that you could ever.
But you're not surrendering to reality. You are surrendering to the will of God, but you don't know what the will of God is, other than other people claiming that they know what it is from some infallible source inspired by God. But then you look at the text with the magic cow bringing people back to life and the 6-day creation and all that, and it clearly isn't from God. It is from other people. So you're totally divorced from reality by adopting obedience to something that asinine. To figure out reality, there isn't a shortcut. We have our empiric methods for what we can get at, and we dig deeper and deeper, and we've created the sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, and we are learning the rule set, physical law, and so on, the best we can. And the fruits, judge them by their fruits. Well, the fruits are being able to talk to you on a machine like this right now, converting sound waves and electricity instead of all that stuff is physical. It seems magical. It isn't. But we learn that on our own, not from magic books, but from trial and error and reasoning and contemplation. It isn't easy, but that's the real way. The best way to get the truth about how reality works is through that, not through trusting some guy in a robe that said he figured it all out.
Or possibly have of it. So you'll never get to any adequate conception. And therefore, if somebody's coming at you with dogma and says God is this bunch of words, that's actually shirk, or it's a form of.
You don't have to reach the end for it to be fruitful. The closer you get, the better you are. So constant improvement is the goal, not perfection. But anyway, we're way far off from.
We've done like 2 hours instead of 1. So hey, thank you, Ryan Dawson.
Because I'm getting into RFK stuff.
I
we
want
can
to hear
talk
about RFK
esoteric someday.
Let's do another one. That was really a good conversation. That's why we exceeded.
I have no
time
idea if
limit
people are interested in that or like, what are they on about? But
yeah, this is a long form podcast, people. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, Ryan. Keep up the great work. I really enjoyed it. Great bunch of topics and ways to approach them, and I appreciate your your seriously empirical approach to these conspiracy matters. So let's talk again sometime. God willing.
All right, man.
All right.
It's funny how people want the same truth criteria when it comes to like physical phenomena and stuff. When you're on an airplane, you want it to go based on aerodynamics and thrust. And when you get in an elevator, you're trusting mechanical science, and they trust it completely. But they don't apply the same truth criteria that we hold to, say, chemistry and physics. Goes out the window when you're talking about men slinging around miracles and stuff. It's like, oh, no, that one happened in my faith, just not all the other ones. Whatever. Okay, let's get the shekel chats. Resilient Juan drops in 3 Benjamin Franklin, says for the documentary, says gifted 50 subscriptions to this person. I saw their email, responded because 30% of that just went to Rumble, but that's all right. They were trying to donate on the site and couldn't. And so that sucks. I don't know what's going on there. You can still go to givesendgo.com/911 and donate there, so that Rumble doesn't take a big chunk of it. Thank you to Resilient One, spelled with a W. The Pee Poopy Man slapped in a Benjamin Franklin. It says, "You're the man, fuck Lincoln." I guess you like that trashing the 9/11 Cougar stuff. Resilient One with 20. Have you heard of Hector Iska yet? I happened to run across it randomly. So if my memory serves me right, I believe that's the creed where Jews charge usury to the goy, but not to each other. And that was in rabbinical law. It's just what a shitty thing to do. But like, they anointed themselves as the chosen race of God, and so it's, one rule for us, another rule for. I mean, they're allowed to rape Gentile too, and Israel actually does that. They rape prisoners legally. And the people who do it, I mean, they know it's bad PR for the rest of the world to know what they've done, but they don't care. Like, they themselves, they only care about the PR. They don't care about the victims of rape or usury. And that was all the shekel chats that I've seen so far. So I'm going to put a rainbow frog in today just for Resilient Juan. I'm going to put a whole bunch of them in there for fun. Look at them jamming. I forgot to do entropy. Shoot. Oh, well. But yeah, that practice, that usury practice, only on the outsiders, was done for centuries. And it's part of why that and the coin clipping and other practices, bloodletting and penis chopping and stuff, is why they were thrown out of so many countries. And it's like they're anti-Semitic. It's like, no, your behavior is self-alienating. It is not a healthy religion to be ethnic supremacist and to treat others outside your in-group like shit, because the backlash will be that they treat you like shit. But you brought that on your own head. There's the shop, antineocon.com. So you can get maps and everything else. P1 Dizzy with a good one. Okay, I'm going on Jackman Radio in 10 minutes. So got to end this here. And that's Jackman Radio. I'll have the link up on Telegram and on X. So see you over there. Peace.